All right. Welcome to the webinar. Patrick, can you take it away?
Absolutely. First, I want to start by saying thanks everyone for joining. I see many attendees are still logging in, but we're going to go ahead and get started just so we can stay on time. Um, Before we start, again, thanks for joining. We have a very exciting topic to cover today around how you can drive EBITDA with integrated sustainability and financial reporting. So the topic today is a topic that is on the top of mind of many executives and leaders and decision makers around the world. And hopefully my intention today is for you to leave this call with a bit more clarity on how the work you're doing or the work the sustainability teams are doing at your organizations can drive financial value. I'm very grateful to have two amazing panelists with us today. First, we have Rajesh, who's the group, who's the group chief financial officer and chief sustainability officer at Landmark Group, one of the largest retailers across 21 countries with 30 million square feet of retail space and 42,000 employees. His unique dual role gives him first-hand experience integrating sustainability metrics directly into financial planning and EBITDA optimization. We're very lucky to have him today, and I'm very much looking forward to learning from Rajesh. And we also have Chisara, who's a senior research lead on the Return on Sustainability Investment, or ROSI, at the NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business, where she oversees ROSI methodology, and she's been doing that for more than 4 years, and research partnerships with many companies, including food, ag, retailers, and manufacturing companies globally. Previously, Chisara served as a senior assurance director with field to market and vice president of certification at Fair Trade, where she created certification strategies for international food and agricultural supply chains. Today, we're bringing an outstanding practitioner, practitioner and academic who have been able to implement at scale um, different methodologies with companies around the world that have generated financial value to companies. Before we go ahead and get started with the session today, I have a few housekeeping items and a high-level agenda to show you. As you can see, we're going through introductions now. Then the goal is to go through a few slides in the next 10 minutes. And then after that, we will focus the majority of the discussion with our panelists, taking questions from the audience and going through some of the questions that we had prepared. Um, some housekeeping items. Let's start with questions. We want to hear from you. I know we're not together in person in a room. I wish we were. But in the meantime, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box. Don't shy away from challenging questions. We want to hear the skeptics out there. We want to hear the good and the bad and the ugly, and we want to be able to hopefully unpack that and leave you all with some insights from today's conversation. We will be recording this and we will be sharing the slides right after. Um, and as I said, really, the goal is for us to answer all of your questions. So do take some time to drop the questions in the Q&A box. So with that, we're going to go ahead and kick off and start with a few slides to walk you through how you could start linking sustainability metrics to financial value today. Before we start, I want to start by focusing on the fact that I think we're going through an inflection point right now globally. CFOs and chief sustainability officers today need to recognize the shift. And it's those who are able to get ahead of the shift that will be the winners in the medium to long term. Here's what's happening out there. 64% of leaders and investors agree that 64% of sustainability linked value creation is an important element in firm strategy and operations. Also, 72% agree that sustainability linked value creation has moderate to significant financial impact. Now, here's the problem statement. 92% of CFOs are boosting sustainability spending in 2025, and 93% see it as a clear business case for investing in sustainability. However, almost two-thirds of those CFOs see it primarily as a cost or risk um, elements or dimensions versus true value creation. It's the CFOs recognize the long-term potential. However, with everything happening in the world from geopolitical challenges and other macroeconomic shifts, immediate pressures lead CFOs to frame sustainability as a cost center. But in reality, there's a lot of value that can be unpacked from the work that CSOs and CFOs are doing globally. As you can see on the next slide, we summarized the framework that was developed by NYU Stern, and we're very lucky to have Chisara with us today, who created this framework, and also Rajesh, who implemented this framework, to walk us through how they did it. And before we jump into that part of the webinar, I want to walk us through a framework that summarizes 4 categories of value creation. Number 1 is revenue uplift. So how would I summarize that? It's being able to accelerate revenue growth through new products, new markets, and better customer value propositions and premium pricing. Just to give you an anecdote, I was meeting with one of our customers last week. They're one of the leading solar panel manufacturing companies globally. They're based in the Benelux area, and they told me that last week was the first week where they lost a client in the Nordics because they were not able to provide certain metrics as they were submitting a bid. We have many other clients, especially in Europe or companies with European presence, that also are losing revenue today because of the inability to meet certain customer requests. However, I also want to acknowledge that some sectors are ahead of others, right? I think I'm seeing that more in real estate and construction and building materials. I'm seeing that more in apparel, in retail, in food, automotive, and machinery and equipments. And I recognize that some sectors are still not as advanced in some of those sectors that I walked us through, but you know, it's coming, and it's important to be proactive and get ahead of the game. So some anecdotes here: 6% revenue growth was generated from sustainability-linked value creation. Customers in certain geographies globally, in Europe and APAC, are willing to pay a 28% premium to pay for sustainable consumer products. I'm seeing the same trend in real estate and construction, with some tax incentives or government-led initiatives in certain countries like the Netherlands and the Nordics. Second is cost reductions. Many of our customers are remanufacturers or adopt circular programs and have already seen value through circular programs or improved operational processes and access to lower cost of capital. What does that mean in practice? In practice, it means there's money in your waste, right? In practice, it means buying back products and recycling them, or reusing them, or redesigning your products from the ground up to be able to reduce packaging waste, for example, can lead to cost reductions. And in fact, many of our customers have already generated around 10% cost reductions across the value chain. And a bonus is carbon emission reduction as well. We're also seeing companies in the top quintile of ESG quintile have an average cost of capital of 6.1% versus 6.55% for the lowest quintile. I know this seems like a small reduction, but the reality is that reduction, if you're borrowing millions or hundreds of millions of dollars or euros or pounds around the world, has a massive impact on your bottom line. Then there is risk. And this is probably one that many of you are aware of because of the rise of regulatory compliance and legal risks around the world. And more companies are realizing that climate risks and physical risks and customer demands are going to start creating really existential risks for their business. 59% of private market investors view risk mitigation as high impact from sustainability linked value creation, with outcomes such as reduced regulatory burden. And then finally, and this is also another thing we're seeing with many of our clients, especially the ones that are owned by private equity funds, that are going through that 5 to 7 or 10-year cycle of owning a portfolio company and are seeing higher exits or projecting higher exits upon higher valuations upon exits for some of their portfolio companies today. I think that is more relevant for companies with in the industrial or manufacturing sector, usually companies that have a very heavy real estate footprint and also emissions footprint globally. So the critical, before I move to the one critical insight, the reality, this is not just corporate sustainability anymore. This is almost an existential threat for your business model. And it's those companies that recognize that today that are able to get ahead of the game and rise as winners versus the companies that are just trying to kick the can down the road that will hopefully learn the hard way that they are going to lose majorly in the next few years and decades. A critical insight is These benefits only materialize when sustainability data reaches decision-grade quality. Data credibility equals financial credibility. CFOs need sustainability data with the same rigor as financial data. Audit trails, evidence management, controls and integrations with financial systems, and clear link to enterprise value. The question for every CFO out there is, how do you move from compliance to value creation? How do you identify material sustainability issues, implement practices to address them, and connect them to financial levers? Many of you here in this room are sustainability leaders, and you're probably asking yourself the question, how can I speak the finance language? And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to answer most of your questions today. Just a few final examples before I turn it to our panelists for questions. Some manufacturers who are switching from high emission steel suppliers to lower carbon alternatives are reducing their scope 3 exposures and also winning contracts with sustainability focused customers. Then there's relocating production closer to renewable energy hub that helps you cut costs and carbon intensity. And finally, being able to adjust your product portfolio to phase out resource intensive lines and introduce greener alternatives can help you win with more customers, can help you retain customers, and can help you penetrate markets in the future. So if I were to summarize everything I said, there's a clear link between sustainability initiatives and EBITDA. I know we're at the very beginning of that journey, so it's very hard for many of you today to be able to build a business case to communicate to your CFO. We empathize with you, and we're hoping that today we can answer many of your questions. I think really it all boils down to being able to track data and being able to communicate that data or those KPIs to the different stakeholders in the room, including your CFO. With that, I'm going to go ahead and start jumping into the question part. Chisara, I'm going to start with you. Recent surveys show that more than 25% of finance professionals still lack reliable tools to incorporate sustainability into financial decision making. How should CFOs modify traditional capital allocation frameworks to properly account for sustainability linked returns and risks in the future?
Thank you so much for the question, Patrick, and thank you for the invitation to be a part of this webinar. And I guess I'll start off by saying first that it's not finance's fault. As someone who sits within a business school and who went through business school earlier in my career, I know that it's not something that the training was being given to do. And so we find ourselves in a place where that is changing now in terms of new approaches to managerial accounting, for example. But if you went through when I did, you probably were not taught. So with that said, there are a number of practices that we have seen work. And the first starts with something quite fundamental, which is communication and bringing finance in. And so finance needs to have the opportunity to learn from the sustainability community, from sustainability practitioners within the organization to be able to understand, okay, beyond the strategies that we've put in place. So for example, a strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, what is it exactly that we're doing from a practice level to address this issue? So how are we reducing our greenhouse gas emissions? And then the identification of some of the benefits that live alongside those. So on the example of greenhouse gas emissions reductions, one that we typically hear about is energy efficiency. So they say, okay, we're going to implement practices so that we can be energy efficient. That's a very straightforward one, because then you say, well, you have the opportunity there to lower your energy costs. Quite straightforward. We have seen, however, that there are additional benefits that might be thought of as being intangible that can also be created from these. So an example would be working with a utility company. We found that in addition to the reduction in energy costs, there was also, because of the improvement in the lighting that was used, there was also an increase in productivity of employees, which we were able to monetize to the tune of about $2 million per year. So again, going from the material issues to the practices, understanding the benefits, and then working with the finance community to figure out how to account for those things. One thing that I will point out, and I think it was in one of the slides that you showed, is that sometimes the benefits may be around avoided costs. And of course, accounting will say, well, that's not dollars in the door, dollars out of the door. So figuring out ways to incorporate that into decision-making is also important. And then I'll just give just a few other top line points just around some of the differences. So I'd say, or opportunities. One would be, we've seen companies implement things like internal costs of carbon. So that's an opportunity for finance to then also layer on a sustainability concern within the decision-making process, such that when a new project comes up for approval, you're also looking at the carbon impact of that new project, and then also what the associated cost would be. I've seen setting a minimum threshold so that a new project would have to address a sustainability initiative. So if it comes through, it has to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by a certain amount or water by a certain amount. And then I've also seen the application of a lower hurdle rate for some projects if they're sustainable. And these are just examples of ways that the two have come together and have been used for decision making.
Very powerful. Thank you, Chisara. Maybe before we move to the second question, one follow-up question on this. Super helpful, very powerful advice. Maybe like honing in on the United States, maybe just to give you another anecdote. This morning, I met with a leading construction company headquartered in the United States. They have around $20 billion in annual revenue. And when I asked them, do you see financial value in the work you're doing today? The answer was very bluntly, no. And I started digging in and understanding, why is that? So I started saying, okay, asking, are customers asking for this? Are you losing bids because of it? What are you being asked to provide from your customers? Same thing around health and safety and energy consumption on their construction sites. Same thing around contractor management and supplier management. And I think as we started digging in, we realized, there's actually a lot of value, but the real problem is the lack of data, number one, but also the lack of collaboration across the value chain, right? In the US specifically, where governments are not doing as much as in the Netherlands or in Norway, where there's top-down government mandates on reductions when it comes to real estate or construction or manufacturing emissions. What are some best practices that companies are adopting today to be able to unlock the value? Number one. Number two is, what are some best practices internally for sustainability leaders to be able to surface these things to their CFOs?
Sure. So what we've seen with ROSI, and I'll just give a quick definition there. So ROSI is a process return on sustainability investment that is based on the premise that when companies are truly embedding sustainability within their strategies and their processes, that they will see benefits in a number of areas that we refer to as value drivers. And those get to some of the questions that you were asking this company this morning. So those value drivers include risk mitigation, sales and marketing on the revenue side, sales and marketing, customer loyalty. So are you keeping up with the changing needs of your customers, be they direct to consumers, or if you're B2B, your commercial customers? They also look at things like innovation. So using sustainability as a means to new revenue generation, looking at stakeholder management and the ability to utilize sustainability and take sustainability concerns into consideration in new deals, in expansion. And so basically going through those value drivers and finding that typically those are leading to not just societal value, but value for the company. And so for companies that are doing this systematically, they have a couple of things in place. They're understanding what data they do have and how they can get it. And that typically, when we're working with companies, that really means getting a cross-functional group together to really understand holistically where value is being created. So not just, oh, I'm recycling in the plant and that's all that I need to know, but also making sure that other elements are other parts of the organization are involved. So that cross-functional communication as a way to get data. So what data do I have? And if I don't have it, what are some of the processes that I need to put in place to be able to obtain that data for decision making? So does that answer your question, Patrick?
It's very powerful. Thank you, and very succinct. I think if I were to maybe summarize it to everyone, and based on what I heard, I think cross-functional collaboration is critical for data exchange, but also for driving initiatives. And we can double click on that shortly with Rajesh. And number two is, I would say, even collaboration across the value chain with your suppliers, with your customers, with other with investors and so on and so forth is critical. And obviously data is the foundation, because without it, you can't speak a common language. And thank you for all the work you're doing on Rosie to be able to close the gap between the different functions. The second question is one also that is top of mind for companies globally, which is around disclosure requirements, right? With the rise of regulatory compliance needs, with mounting disclosure requirements, CSRD in Europe and SB 253 and 261 in California, how can CFOs develop decision-grade sustainability data that meets both the compliance needs and the internal investment evaluation standards? And what role does supply chain transparency play in this process?
Great. So yeah, I'm glad that you zeroed in on decision grade, because from my understanding of the requirements that are being rolled out, there's a very loose definition of how to go about calculating these. And so I guess I would start by saying that disclosure alone does not solve the problem. You are probably, particularly in the early stages, you'll probably see a wide variety of credibility in terms of the data that will be put out. And so really, I would see this less as a requirement to disclose and more as an opportunity to really double down on understanding the risks that may be inherent in your operations and where the different locations where you operate, to be able to work with your sustainability teams to truly get a handle on what the risks are. And then to, again, not just for the requirements of meeting disclosure, but also from a strategic exercise that will be operationalized, really think about putting into place how you're going to work towards addressing these risks. One of the processes that we've seen with some companies is evaluating the cost of doing nothing. And so it's one thing to just say, here's where we have potential issues, but then what are the costs of not doing that? And so one of the companies that we worked with through a partner was Arca Continental. They had made a public commitment to increase the usage of recycled PET within their bottles. They're a Coca-Cola bottler, largest in Latin America. And their do nothing scenario would have led them to $200 million in risk, primarily based on not having control over the recycled PET market. And so looking at your risks, figuring out what are the costs of doing nothing, and then also then subsequently identifying how you're actually going to take action is really important with this.
Thank you so much, Chisara. I was just trying to pronounce PET for the audience just to make sure everyone is aware of it, but it's basically a common type of plastic found in bottles and food containers. But thank you for that. Very, very helpful. I'm seeing a lot of questions from the audience, which we're going to get back to. Some of them are for you, Chisara, but maybe before we get to those, I would love to jump to Rajesh. We have a lot of topics as well to cover with you as a practitioner. Rajesh, thanks again so much for making the time for this. I know how busy you are running a global group like Landmark. The first question that I have in mind is around the fact that, we don't see many leaders holding both titles of CFOs and CSOs. I'm hopeful that that will become the trend in the future, but even better if the job of a CFO expands just to become where sustainability becomes really at the core, the DNA of that role. What specific changes have you made to traditional financial planning processes to incorporate sustainability metrics? And if you don't mind sharing a concrete example where a sustainability initiative directly improved your EBITDA at Landmark Group and how you track that impact.
Thank you, Patrick. Very happy to be here. And but I'll just quickly take the question. You kind of alluded to how a CFO is a CSO. I think to me, actually, it's almost like the most logical place to be because, and very specific reasons. I mean, three in particular. One is it requires a very good understanding of the business, somebody who's ubiquitous, right? So you have, because sustainability is not a corner department, it's the entire enterprise and the entire value chain. Other than the CEO, the CFO is the one who has his or her tentacles across the whole company. That's one reason. Second is it requires a lot of reporting, data, unbiased calculations, unbiased view of the impact on the business. Every function claims they're doing things that are sustainable, but probably finance is the one who can put the mirror on them. And that is very important. And hence reporting, I mean, finance is naturally the function who does all the reporting. So sustainability reporting will also is going through the change. And I actually believe, and I literally have it outside my office written, that carbon statements will become more important than financial statements. So good for Tracera because you are in that business. I'm not saying for that. And finally, the third reason is it's an expensive transition. And so find the money, right? How to make this transition. And that's what a CFO and his team can do best. So that's the finance and sustainability together. I think we've not changed any financial planning process, but essentially, in the end, the business cannot say, oh, for me to become more sustainable, I'm going to, I'm going to reduce my margins, because in reality, I mean, it's like saying, yeah, I mean, I'm going to damage the planet. I'm going to do things that are not considered good, but clock my revenues. But essentially, you're then hiding, that you're basically, if your costs don't reflect the right way of doing business, then it's just a matter of time. It'll catch up, or customers will find out. So I think it's like, you got to walk and chew gum at the same time. So for our business heads, sourcing heads, people who are designing the products, it has to become, and it is becoming, that's part of the job, to make it part of daily life. There is no change that, I'm going to take a hit on margins, right? I mean, on examples, I think the most concrete and is actually I mean, you had it in your chart, and that's why I'm picking that, is on just the cost of borrowing, right? So, I mean, thanks to our work on sustainability, where we are able to far exceed what any bank requires, that we've changed 100% of our financing to be green financing. And that itself is yes, to be honest, I have spoken in forums that the impact or the delta that is given to you as a discount is so small. Frankly, I say maybe a digit is missing in it. But it is nevertheless a saving, and it's a clear cut, improvement in our cost of borrowing, and hence it kind of helps you get started on this journey. But it's just a start. It's never going to be enough to pay for all what you need to invest in.
Rajesh, thank you so much. Maybe one quick follow-up question. Given your global role as a CFO and a CSO for Landmark, are you seeing geographical differences in terms of where do you see these positive financial benefits happening? Is it happening more in APAC or the GCC or in Europe or in the US? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
You're saying financial benefits?
Exactly, like the cost of borrowing, is that consistent across all the
Yeah.
geographies where you
Yeah.
play, or is it more specific to a
See, I think
geography
it's,
versus another?
yeah. See, it's if I stick to, so we are predominantly a Middle East company. We obviously have operations in India, we have in Southeast Asia, but the bulk of the business where I'm sitting is in the Middle East. And yes, the cost of borrowing can only go down if there are banks who are ready to offer you, sustainability linked loans or take sustainability linked deposits, right? And we've actually been amongst the first in almost all the countries that we have of our type of company, in UAE, in Saudi, in Qatar, in, we are the first ones to have rolled out sustainability linked financing over the last 3, 4 years plus, right? So it's been quite a good journey because we're actually literally working with the banks to put in these programs. Now, thankfully, now it has caught up, and pretty much all the big banks have this facility, right? So, but yes, it is come here a tad later than what it was available in Europe, but it has come, so we are able to use that.
That's great, thank you. And I'm also seeing a lot of comments, one of them in the chat around Greece, saying even here in Greece, where sustainability is not in the epicenter of the business world, banks give loans with very low interest rates to companies with good ESG ratings. So and I think those two statements made my day, and I'm glad to see the GCC and Greece leading the wave here, and hopefully many more countries to follow. So thank you for that. Rajesh, one more question before we move to the questions from the audience, and I'm seeing a lot of questions dropping in, so I'm looking forward to tackling them. Some of them are very complex, so I hope Rajesh and Chisara, are you ready to answer those? So recent research shows that most CFOs plan to boost sustainability spending in 2025, but many still see it primarily as a cost rather than a value creator. How do you bridge this perception gap within your leadership team? Are there specific KPIs you use to demonstrate sustainability's contribution to enterprise value?
Yeah. See, first of all, I'd like to say that when you get started on this journey, you realize that there is a lot of synergy between cost removal and carbon removal. And that is the biggest first epiphany that you get if you're coming from finance, that actually removing dollars from your cost is also removing costs. So to get started, to prime the pump, if you will, that's how you do it. You go for things that help you, like energy management, right? Reduce your energy bill, whether through renewables or better management of energy, gives you a cost saving, and it gives you a huge amount of offsets, right? And we are finding that the initial part of the journey is very easy to fund through cost reductions. But yes, on one hand, I do believe that cost is a bottomless pit. Whenever you put scrape, things come up, right? Now, if you give your teams who are working on these programs deep down, different functions, different operations, a bigger purpose, you find that they're able to do more. If you only look at reducing costs to help profits, there is some people who will be excited, but not everybody is as excited, right? But when you look at the bigger purpose, people find a lot of savings to offset sustainable your journey. I would think that's the initial part of the journey, and then gradually, as we are seeing now, the improvement in our consumers, hopefully you will become the brand of choice or remain the brand of choice if you're already a leader, if you are far more sustainably oriented.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rajesh. And I think I think we're ready to tackle the questions from the audience, but maybe before we do, one final question for you, Rajesh. I think this is something that the industry that you play in particular is going through, I would say, early disruption. And in my opinion, retail, lifestyle retail, fashion, apparel will go through disruption faster than any other industry because the consumer behavior drives that. Um, and maybe I don't know if you have the data, but if you don't, it's okay. But you can also give high level directional data. If you think about the different businesses and the retail categories that you play in, right? Like you have grocery stores, you have electronics, you have home retail, you even have hospitality. Where do you see the shift happening first when it comes to consumers demanding or willing to pay a premium for greener product among the different categories that you play in?
See, I would say in a macro level, unfortunately, consumers are not that ready yet to pay premium. And people respond that in surveys. When you ask somebody, they all say, yeah, of course, I'm not gonna, I'll be happy to. The reality is, but at the shopping till, at the point of sale, people are not yet ready to pay a 5, 10, or whatever percent premium. I think the way to look at it is it's table stakes, right? If you want to be in the consideration set of your consumers, if all things are equal, you will be the brand of choice. So you will get higher market share at the same price, is how, we think, more than saying, hey, can I price up? Because we feel almost like the same product has to be sustainably sourced, right? So I think it's a different, we are not into the mindset of, okay, I'm gonna, it's because it's very easy to try and price up your product and pay for whatever your operations are. So we are a super value focused brand. We want to bring all the value for our consumers. So we never kind of try and mix it. And I can tell you, yes, there is a shift, but it's a shift of market share. It's a shift of being a brand of choice rather than a premium. Now, if your product itself inherently has the ability to price up, this should help you, be in better position for that.
Love that, Rajesh. Thank you so much.
And
Very powerful insights.
if I could just jump in on that, and this is US based, and I know that there also there's some associated research, which I can't cite off the top of my head here, but we do have a sustainable market share index, some research, point of sale for 36 consumer packaged good categories in the United States. And we have seen for those categories, and so those include things like cookies, dairy, chocolate, coffee, and some others. But we have seen that those products that are marketed sustainable, that they are growing at almost two times the rate as conventional, and that there is a price premium being paid at the point of purchase. For
Fantastic.
a variety, the reasons behind, I mean, part of it may be availability. Obviously, it has to be
Yeah.
a strong product, but we just wanted to interject with that.
I think we believe that. It's just that we don't want our organization to get lethargic or,
Yeah, yeah.
pass on the
Absolutely.
effort, what you have to do to be sustainable. It should be based on your normal operation. We are very sure
Absolutely.
that
Yeah,
your products will be valued better by your customers.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for that, Chisara. And also, I would want to point out that this is why I asked about different geographies, right? Because different geographies have different parameters. Like the US have higher disposable income, but also the UAE has higher disposable income. But I think the US companies invest a lot in their brands, and sometimes that can help generate higher sales and marketing ROI. So excited to see more and more data in this space. Chisara, I think we have a few questions. One actually is for you, and I'm going to go ahead and answer it live. The question is from an anonymous attendee that says, thank you, Chisara, for your valuable insight. Research indicates that achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals could unlock $12 trillion in market opportunities by 2030. How should different industries, e.g. manufacturing and retail, approach ROSI calculations differently? And which financial metrics tend to resonate mostly with CFOs in each sector?
Well, that's a rather large question, just in
I'm
terms
going to
of
post it
scope.
in the chat, in case it's helpful.
I guess how I'll respond is, one, I think the approach, the basic approach, at least when we've applied it, has been the same, as in you're looking at your material sustainability issues, you're defining the practices that are associated with those, you're looking at the benefits, be they on the revenue side or cost reduction side, going through the value drivers, and then you're seeking to, from those benefits, quantify those and monetize those. So I think that those would be we've used that approach across industries that we've worked with. I'd say that perhaps, though, that where the value is being derived may look different in different places. And in other words, if you're a tech company or if you're more service oriented, you're going to be looking more for how the sustainability initiatives might help with customer acquisition or lifetime value versus something that for cost of goods sold for manufacturing. But I can't speak to that, but I would say that the process that we've been using has been the same.
Chisara, maybe one follow-up question on that. As you start seeing ROSI being integrated into more and more financial processes globally with companies, do you envision starting to see some standardization around how to measure or how to define or how to identify drivers of enterprise value across companies within the same industry? So, for example, do you envision Zara and H&M more or less starting to use the same metrics to measure things, or do you envision every company creating its own model over the next 5 to 10 years?
That's an interesting question. I think that there are similarities, obviously, within industries. So we've seen, for example, circularity is something that has been picking up, at least in the US, for clothing, for apparel. And so many of those companies then will be looking at metrics that help them track rental or resale or remake, right? And so we do think that eventually that there will be some similar metrics. Not to say that circularity is being used in many other industries as well, but the metrics for tracking will look different in different industries, if that answers your question.
Very powerful. Yes, thank you. Rajesh, we have a lot of questions for you. Let me maybe just pick one. They're all from anonymous attendees. One is around from an anonymous attendee saying, Rajesh, I'm curious, how does wearing both CSO and CFO hats shape the way you talk about financial performance with investors and the board? And when it comes to sustainability wins, what kind of financial language do you use so it really clicks with more traditional finance folks? And I know, if I remember well, Landmark Group is not a public company. So, and despite it not being public, you're doing all this work. So curious about how you manage stakeholders on the board and beyond.
Yeah. What was the first part of the question? How do we?
So how do you talk about financial performance with investors and the board?
Yeah.
And when it comes to sustainability wins, what kind of financial language do you use so it really clicks with more traditional finance folks?
See, the first one is you cannot have a separate conversation with the board. I mean, they only want the performance, but I mean, in a sense, it's a 360-degree scorecard of your business, which includes doing the right things. I mean, if you start creating profits by doing the wrong things, then perhaps you have the wrong board, right? Now, yes, the question comes how much to invest. We don't, we take all the right things. So, like, we've invested in a recycling facility. We are amongst the few brands who have their own textile recycling facility, and there was a hope that it would help, start driving the nation and the region into circularity with respect to textiles, and it is happening. We are very much able to lead the conversations with even markets beyond, right? So again, coming back to the core question, it's just part of the same conversation. I think the more you try and separate it out, the more challenging it's going to become. I mean, yes, it's a tough job, but that's why it is given to us, because we have to help manage at the same time. You cannot go and say, okay, I'm going to reduce my profits. Nobody is saying that, and nobody is going to allow you that. Hopefully, it starts the business, the brand. I think we've literally said we're going to look at the whole enterprise. By the way, our sustainability report is scope 1, 2, and 3. We don't want to fake it by just talking of scope 1 and 2, because for most companies, 80% plus is scope 3, right? So I think it's a philosophy I'm talking here. We're not going to try and say, oh, I'm going to hide behind, oh, I need to invest to drive sustainability. I think it's like, yeah, you got to be sustainable. If you're a leading brand, you cannot afford to be not sustainably oriented.
Absolutely. And Rajesh, since we're talking philosophy here as well, maybe one question for you, Chisara, that would love to get your take on this is, when I started Tracera 3 years ago, my selfish reason for doing it is creating what I call is multi-capitalism, which is, I'm a capitalist at heart, and I believe that capitalism in general drives innovation and progress,
Yes.
right? I think something Rajesh said that inspired me to ask you that question is he mentioned the word profit, and generating profit to your shareholders at the expense of doing the wrong thing, right? Which is very hard to define in legal term, wrong and right. But the reality is deep inside each one of us, what's wrong and what's right, right? If you're generating money to your shareholders and polluting a river, and at the bottom of that river, there's 1,000 residents that are not benefiting from this and actually only being harmed from a health perspective. And, we see that a lot in the United States with wealth gaps based on zip codes, among other places in the world, right? I call the United States because I live there. So I see it day in and day out. From your perspective, do you envision the world moving towards this multi-capitalistic dimension where companies are able to look at their returns or profits in a more multi-dimensional way rather than the old way of thinking in terms of profit?
Yeah.
And if so, what would it take to get there? I guess we'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think there is a very simple answer to this. There is a lack of awareness. And the minute you are able to communicate the impact your brands or your business is having on the environment, on water, in waste, on emissions, if it's credibly presented in a credible, honest, and meaningful and scientific way, right, the conversation transforms, because your CEOs of your business units, okay, I'm talking a multi-business unit, right? So I'm not talking a single CEO. Once they get to grab or absorb, right, what is the impact of their brand on the environment and the long-term impact and all, I think 99% of people step back and they start thinking, right? Even the extent to which they embark on the journey varies, obviously, right? But 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, let's to be more conservative, people start making that journey. And I think the biggest problem is for sustainability practitioners is they're not able to present the data in a credible enough way, not able to help understand, help explain, right? I mean, I'm an engineer, so that also helps, break down, the way what's happening around whatever we're doing. So actually, that's the dimension I've used. And yes, there are those 2 out of 10 who don't, but hopefully to take the 8 early, kind of people who want to make the difference, it works out quite well.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the multidimensional, to be honest, I mean, what Larry Fink wrote in his letter to his shareholders, right? Larry Fink of BlackRock, but that was written 2-3 years ago, and then he's perhaps backtracked, but fine. I mean, whatever reason, hopefully, but that statement remains. He said, we care about sustainability not only because we love the planet, but because we are the fiduciaries of our shareholders. So I mean, I call myself now, I lead sustainability for the company. First, financial sustainability, and second, environmental sustainability. And I'm not saying first and second in an order. It's 2 types of sustainability and they're interlinked. So if you think of
Absolutely.
them, if you're a short term, you're just looking at this quarter, perhaps you'll say, let's not sign up for, X, Y, or Z sustainability initiative. But if you're looking, you have a longer horizon or even a medium term horizon, I think you've got to look at it.
Yeah. I guess the only thing that I would add, very well said, Rajesh, is that I would go back to your comment about the philosophy, right? So Rosie, as I said earlier, is really built on the premise, starting with companies truly embedding sustainability within their strategy and their decision making, so that it's not just this kind of bolt on, oh, we're going to have one sustainable product line. It's really kind of understanding the importance of sustainability to your overall business strategy across regions. It's understanding the opportunities, and it's understanding the risks. There's so many examples of where companies have maybe done the wrong thing, and there have been exposés which cost money, which costs legal, there are legal fees associated with that. There's loss of trust from consumers. So I think with this more transparent world that we live in, companies who are not doing this just from their own philosophical drive will be forced, I would say, in some respect, to at least start to consider some of these. So better to do it now, and be prepared and have that as part of your strategy, and get the opportunities out of doing that.
Absolutely. Thank you both. I think I'm seeing more and more questions. Maybe we can take 3 more questions. I see 2 for you, Rajesh, and 1 for you, Chisara. Maybe we can start with the one for you, Rajesh, from Petra Wickland. Her question is around Scope 3. And the question is, how is your plan to reduce your Scope 3 emissions as your influence on Scope 3 emissions is limited, Rajesh? Do you plan to offset those emissions?
No, not at all. We don't believe in offsets. Offsets is a license to pollute. We believe, yes, eventually, in the long run, we may run out of everything, and then a small 5-10% of our impact, we may choose to use offsets. But there is so much to do first. To be honest, I feel people who start with offsets are taking the easy way out, and then you fundamentally don't believe in doing the right thing, in my opinion. Sorry for a slightly more polarized view. But we actually absolutely influence Scope 3. We completely influence because, okay, maybe not every company will be in that position. We are, a leading brand, a set of brands, and we orchestrate our entire Scope 3. So we choose, well, by the way, in a way, anybody can influence who you buy from, right? Or who you buy, what you buy. You have to have a view of what is the impact of that, right? Your input raw materials, for us, 50-60,000 tons of cotton and 70,000 tons of polyester and X gazillions of tons of wood. All that is inputs coming into the product. So we are making sure our suppliers are choosing the right materials, the right processes. We've put audit on top, third-party audits to help monitor what is going into our supply chain. So absolutely, we are influencing it. I think, yes, there may be some companies who may not be able to influence as much, but we are fully influencing, and we believe people should push their suppliers to be far more, compliant.
Absolutely. Maybe before we move to Chisara for one more question, very powerful, Rajesh, and I totally agree with you. I think for those of you out there, the way I would think of this is, most of companies' emissions come from scope 3, as Rajesh mentioned, especially in manufacturing and retail, where usually 80 to 90% of those emissions come from scope 3. And usually most of those emissions come from category 1 or category 11, depending on the sector that you're in. If you're selling electronics or batteries or cars, and most of the emissions are in the lifetime of the products that you sell, that's more downstream. And Cat 1 is more upstream. Sometimes Cat 4 and 9 are relevant. But I think the ones where you have leverage or where you have a bit more control is 1, 1 and 4, right? In terms of choosing your suppliers, asking your suppliers to reduce their emissions,
Yeah.
changing the
If
products
I
that
may
you buy.
interject, Patrick, sorry to interject, I forgot. We also look at the downstream, because that is the last part of the customer journeys. What does the customer do with the product? How do they use it? How long they use it? What happens after life? So that part is, for example, we said we are now engaging in active take back programs. We've put in our own recycling facility for some of it. The rest we are working with partners. So you have to manage. You cannot sort of, just leave the customer on their own to deal with the product once they have bought it from you. So that closes the scope 3, the upstream and the downstream.
Absolutely. Great. Chisara, one last question before we wrap up. If you had to pick one KPI that really proves sustainability creates business value, what would it be?
Oh, you're asking me? Yeah, go on. Sorry, I think
Both of
Chisara
us,
first.
because
Yeah, I
that
would
one.
love from
I
both of you.
don't-
Yeah.
So honestly, I'd love to hear what Rajesh says. I don't think that it's realistic to just say that you pick one. Because I think that just oversimplifies the idea that you just do this one thing and then you'll be able to say that you're sustainable. So yeah, that would be my answer. I'd love to hear what Rajesh.
I think it's, if you think about it, it's more like what is your, like input output ratio, right? So how much is wasted along the way? And that itself is a very good low hanging fruit to go with, right? And it'll save you money as well. So improving your yields, removing waste, right? So I think that kind of sort of a flow is, I'm just giving, I mean, of course we could say, hey, what are your emissions, what are your water, what, those are the standard, things. But if you look at it,
I think we lost Rajesh, right?
Yeah, we lost your audio.
oh,
Oh,
is
Seems
it
like
still
back.
there? Sorry, yeah.
Yes.
I'm saying the first, to get started, oh, my internet connection is unstable. So I think it's reducing waste. So what is your input output throughput ratio? How much of what you are using is getting wasted along the way? You need to measure that. That itself will give you a very quick return. You can get started on your journey of sustainability. Cut the
Fantastic. Thank
waste. Cut the
Yeah.
waste.
I love that, Rajesh. Thinking like an engineer in terms of input and output. Love it. That's what we need. And Chisara, thank you so much. I think this was a fantastic session. I think for those of you where we couldn't answer your questions, please do reach out and to me or Rajesh or Chisara. We're more than happy to have conversations, especially the ones that are mentioning that are having challenge cracking through internally in their companies and having these conversations with the right stakeholders and getting pushbacks from certain departments like finance. So thank you. Maybe as we wrap up, um, again, thank you, Rajesh and Chisara, for your time. It was a pleasure doing this with you. I think in terms of what to expect next, for those of you who attended or registered and couldn't attend, you will get a recording from this. And I do encourage you to visit our website and follow us on LinkedIn and explore our webinar series. but also email me for follow-up questions, and also email Rajesh or Chisara in case you have any specific questions that you would like to ask them. So this was a fantastic session. Thanks again, Chisara and Rajesh, and thanks everyone for making the time, and have a wonderful, blessed week.